Hi, good morning. How's everyone doing?
Well,
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to Dismantling the Discrimination to Incarceration Pipeline for Transgender People of Color. My name is Simone Bell, and I'm the Southern Regional Director for Lambda Legal here in the Southern Region. I'm serving as the moderator for this panel entitled Dismantling the Discrimination to Incarceration Pipeline for Transgender People of Color. Today we have three wonderful presenters. Our first presenter is Chinyere Ezie. She's a nationally recognized civil rights lawyer who specializes in constitutional litigation and transgender rights advocacy. Chinyere is lead counsel for Ashley Diamond, a transgender woman whose lawsuit challenging Georgia's practice of denying transgender inmates safekeeping and trans-related medical care received the backing of the U.S. Department of Justice and resulted in significant policy changes and a monetary settlement. Chinyere has also represented transgender individuals in employment discrimination matters and lobbied for increased protections against gender identity discrimination in areas of healthcare, insurance, housing, and education. Chinyere is currently a staff attorney at the Southern Poverty Law Center. She is also a William J. Fulbright Scholar and a graduate of Yale University and Columbia Law School, where she served as editor-in-chief of the Columbia Journal of Gender and Law. We also have with us today Ezie King, the Southern Regional Staff Attorney for the Transgender Rights Collaboration with Southerners on New Ground. Ezie joined TLC at Song after working as a criminal defense attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ezie brings their legal career at the Federal Defenders of Western North Carolina and subsequently worked in North Carolina State Court as an assistant public defender with the Mecklenburg County Public Defender's Office, representing indigent youth and adults charged with criminal offenses. Ezie also served, am I saying that right? Ezie also served on the North Carolina Public Defender Association Committee on Racial Equity. Ezie earned their law degree at American University Washington College of Law, where they served as managing editor of the American University Criminal Law Brief, and worked as a Dean's Fellow at the Project on Addressing Prison Rape. Prior to law school, Ezie graduated magna cum laude from Cornell University with a dual degree in government and sociology, and organized in the prison abolitionist and anti-police brutality movements with critical resistance. And last but not least, Demoya Gordon is a staff and transgender rights project attorney for Lambda Legal, the oldest and largest national legal organization committed to achieving full recognition of the civil rights of lesbian, gay men, bisexuals, transgender people, and people with HIV. Demoya brings to her work an intersectional focus aimed at addressing how discriminatory laws, policies, and systems uniquely and disproportionately affect LGBT people of color, LGBT immigrants, and low-income LGBT people communities. Demoya is currently representing transgender people across the country on a wide range of issues, including bathroom discrimination, denial of transition-led related health care, unjust treatment by law enforcement, and failure to protect from sexual and physical abuse in the prison. The National LGBT Bar Association named Demoya one of 2014's best LGBT attorneys under 40. In 2013, Lawyers of Color included Demoya on its annual Hot List, which recognizes 100 hot. Let's take a moment and accept that she's on the hot list. Which recognizes 100 exceptional early to mid-career minority attorneys under the age of 40. I'm gonna change that to diverse attorneys. So, welcome to our panelists and welcome to our audience. So, to begin with, Chinyere, can you provide us a little background on the issues?
Absolutely, Simone, and thanks again for agreeing to be our moderator. Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If that changes, wiggle your fingers or something like that. So, we're so glad to be having this conversation. Right now, we're in the midst of a crisis for the transgender community, both in terms of their exposure and vulnerability to violence, as well as their exposure to the injustices of, what would purportedly be the criminal justice system. There's an incarceration crisis in this community. It affects people who are both young and old. We have 39% of transgender youth who are, part of our communities encountering the criminal justice system in the form of juvenile detention. And we also have, with respect to adults, 47% of Black transgender people entering the incarceration system at some point in their lives. Even for people who are not Black or Latino, that statistic applies to Black and Latino people. The statistics read that 1/3 of transgender people in this country are, interacting with the criminal justice system in their lives, and that's a result of a set of practices around policing, around discrimination, around education access, around employment access, that really make this community vulnerable across the board.
Awesome, thank you. So what are some of the drivers that force trans people into the system of mass incarceration?
So I'll start by talking about some of the discrimination and mistreatment that transgender people face in the context of education. This takes a wide variety of forms, and it's something that we're working on very strongly in the community. Can folks hear me? I can't hear myself.
So.
Okay.
I'm trying to get them to turn it
okay.
up. So
yeah, I couldn't hear that weird thing where you can hear yourself, so I figured you guys couldn't hear me. Should I just keep going?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. So this is an issue that we're working on quite fervently in the community right now, in the advocacy community. The kinds of discrimination and mistreatment that transgender people face in the education context takes a wide variety of forms. It's everything from refusing to use a person's preferred name, refusing to use their correct gender, banning them from doing something as basic as using the bathroom that fits their gender at school, refusing to update folks' records even after they've updated their legal identity documents, which can have a number of negative effects, including outing people as trans, affecting their ability to apply to college, to apply for jobs, to apply for scholarships, and things like that. At the college level, transgender people at pretty alarming rates are actually oftentimes refused admission outright to college on the basis of being trans, or if they're even admitted, they are refused housing according to their gender. And these kind of discriminatory policies actually go against the protocol for affirming transgender people in all aspects of life, including using the correct name, using the correct pronoun, allowing people to use facilities according to their gender identity. And the discriminatory policies like these take a toll on transgender and also gender nonconforming students in a variety of ways. It causes or exacerbates mental health challenges, including depression, low self-esteem, and even suicidal behavior in transgender and gender nonconforming students. It ostracizes and stigmatizes students, which contributes to an environment that is conducive to bullying and harassment by other students, and sometimes even by staff members at school. It causes students to miss school, which affects obviously their academic achievement and their aspirations, which contributes to the school to prison pipeline. And we're starting to see now that attacks on students have moved into the legislatures. We started to see this last year, and it's really hit high gear this year, where lawmakers across the country are trying to essentially criminalize the use of the bathroom for large swaths of the community. And a lot of these bills, they've been proposed now, I want to say in around 29, there are about 29 of these bills that have been proposed in about 12 states. And a lot of these bills are actually targeting students. And a lot of them actually, create like a private right of action, essentially, put what we call a bounty on the heads of transgender and gender nonconforming students. And so far, we've been able to defeat these bills, but the work isn't over, and some of the rhetoric around these bills has been really, really damaging. In South Dakota, where thankfully the bill that passed through the legislature there was vetoed by the governor, but during the debates, one of the proponents of this bill actually said something to the effect of, it's, I can't help it if you're so, speaking of students, you're so twisted that you don't know who you are, or something like that. Like, imagine being a young person in South Dakota, dealing with all the stresses that you already have as being a young person, the additional stresses of being transgender, and hearing someone who is in a position of power and holds a certain amount of stature in the community, saying in a public forum, calling you twisted. Imagine the toll that that takes on a young person. So, I mean, all of this is against an already really hostile backdrop in schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students. In the National Transgender Discrimination Survey that was done in 2011 and surveyed about 6,000 transgender and gender nonconforming people nationwide, transgender and gender nonconforming people in K through 12 reported that 78% of them reported they had been harassed in school, 78%. 35% had experienced physical assault, 12% sexual violence, and 15% had actually left school altogether because of the experiences they were having in schools. And so, with schools already being all too often a hostile environment for students, coupled with the attacks that we're now seeing in the legislature, it's not at all surprising that transgender people, and especially transgender people of color, are at increased risk of getting swept up in the criminal justice system.
Thanks so much for that, Demoya. I think the realities are really depressing for gender nonconforming students in American schools. And one person who's had a real experience with that, who I would like to just take a moment to bring into the room, is Ashley Diamond, my client. She really was hoping to be here today, and is pretty heartbroken that for parole reasons she was unable to join this panel. But she's someone who left school before receiving her high school diploma because of bullying and harassment. She was being sent to the principal's office when she wore dresses to school, and when she dressed in affirmance with her gender identity. And it's something that's really real for a lot of students, and it pushed her out of the educational system too early. And then, at that point in time, she encountered the next problem that we have identified as a real driver of the mass incarceration crisis for transgender people, and that's workplace and employment discrimination. So, Ashley Diamond, like many trans people, was trying to find work in her community. She grew up in rural Rome, Georgia, and she applied to Walmart, she applied to McDonald's, all sorts of jobs that she would obtain, based on her, the fact that she's smart, that she's capable, that she was motivated. But when they, got to her first day of work and they're doing orientation paperwork, and she has to provide a driver's license, it's extremely hard for transgender people in this country to get identity documents that affirm their gender. It's very difficult without intrusive questioning, things that really infringe on privacy, such as proof of surgery in many jurisdictions, et cetera. And so, upon seeing her license that said she had, an M on the gender marker, she was denied job after job. And we're seeing across the country that transgender individuals experience unemployment levels that really exceed most other communities. And as a result, a lot of people survive on, black economies that, survival economies, and those economies are heavily criminalized. And so you see people doing sex work, but also being really heavily policed, being targeted as sex workers when they're doing other unrelated activities. For instance, there was a pretty high-profile case out in, was it Iowa? Midwest, where last year a woman
Iowa, yeah.
Okay, checked into a hotel with another transgender friend. They were going to attend her brother's funeral, and they were arrested by police on suspicion of prostitution because the staff at the Drury Inn, which sounds like a terrible place, don't ever go there, decided that they must be sex workers because there are two transgender women gassed, sleeping in a hotel room. And so there's really, really, and she was in prison for like 3 weeks until she could get bail money, again, for being in a hotel room while trans. And so, we see walking while trans being enough to sort of have police encounters. We see a lot of people going to jail for low-level theft offenses. Ashley Diamond was arrested for writing a bad check. Bad checks in the amount of $5 here, $7 here, when once again, after living out of dumpsters and applying for job after job, she was sort of forced to less than desirable means, but it's, I think unemployment looms large as a driver for the vulnerability that this community faces and, and their interactions with the criminal justice system. And speaking on other depressing topics, another issue is, of course, familial rejection. We know that, anecdotally, statistically, whatever you have it, the numbers are really high. Unfortunately, this is a community that hasn't necessarily gained acceptance at the rates that LGBT people have gained acceptance, although I'm not saying the work is over, with respect to those communities, but we do see very high levels of youth homelessness. Something like 30 or 40% of all youth who are on the streets are LGBT, and again, sort of a shift towards more of them being gender, non-conforming, and transgender. And so you have people who are, again, sort of engaging in survival economies at a very early age because their parents won't support them. And, and even when, again, it's walking down the street, we have police officers targeting these communities and isolating them for a lot of increased scrutiny.
Yeah, just to add to what, is this even on?
Pull it closer.
Yeah, it is on, okay. Helps when you speak directly into it. But just to add on to that, I think when we talk about pipeline, I think what we're really talking about also is the high rates of homelessness, the high rates of unemployment due to discrimination are really directly fueling trans people, especially trans people of color at higher rates into the criminal justice system. When you talk about being someone who's unemployed, who may be living on the streets, you're at a higher risk to even just have interaction with a police officer, and also be subject to crimes that are essentially crimes of poverty. As someone who's practiced law here in North Carolina as a public defender, you would simply be amazed at how many things that are crimes that you would not think of, that I'd never even thought of as someone who, considers myself to be fairly educated and a practicing attorney. I didn't know until I was in court and had a client that I was defending with a crime of sleeping in public. Is actually a criminal offense in the state of North Carolina. And another crime, soliciting alms, which is essentially panhandling, asking people for money, is also a criminal offense. So when you look at crimes like that have no victim, that are directly correlated with just being poor, we can see the ways in which trans people are incarcerated at a higher rate. And even in the encounters that trans people are having with the police, they are experiencing extraordinary rates of harassment and discrimination. Just to cite the survey that has already been mentioned, the National Trans Discrimination Survey, Black trans people reported 38% of the time that they face police encounters, that they face some sort of harassment or discrimination by police. 14% of them reported physical assault by police. And we also know that sexual assault carried out by police officers happening too. They reported that at a rate of 6%. So I think we can really see how we end up in situations where, like all of the people here, we represented people who are trans, who are somehow tied up in the criminal justice system, and it's a problem starting now to get more attention, but it's certainly not anything new.
So let's all take a moment and take a deep breath. This is some pretty heavy stuff. So now I want to say, so we've heard about what the drivers are. So once folks are in the criminal justice system, what are some of the problems that people encounter throughout the system?
Unfortunately, this news doesn't get any less bleak at this stage. there's really pervasive and really alarming problems that transgender and gender nonconforming folks face in incarcerated settings. That's both in the juvenile system and in jails and prisons. One of the first issues that you encounter is housing. And Ashley Diamond, who again wishes she could be here with you all, she served a term of about 3.5 years for nonviolent theft offense. And the first, she was picked up from by the police in her Hannah Montana pajamas, which she would tell you if she were in the room, so I'm not embarrassed to share it. And she arrived at prison, presenting as her authentic self, as in women's clothing, with prominent breasts, et cetera, and tells everyone she's transgender, and she gets thrown into a men's prison. Despite asking to be housed with women, despite exclaiming, shutting off the roof that she's a woman, there was no room, there was no interest, even though federal law actually requires that transgender individuals be housed and on a case-by-case basis, not based solely on anatomy or other factors. There was no consideration ever given in her 3.5 years to honoring her request of housing her where she felt she'd be the safest, as federal law requires, which in her mind was a women's prison. And so, Demoya might have some more comments to share on that point, but as you could imagine, that creates a number of issues for transgender individuals, transgender women, and others who are in the system.
Absolutely. I mean, almost universally, transgender people in the U.S. are housed based on sex assigned or presumed at birth or anatomy, as opposed to being housed based on gender identity. And that's been the experience of my client, Passion Star, who's incarcerated in Texas and who's been moved from men's prison to men's prison to men's prison. I mean, she's been in at least 10 different, what they call in Texas, units, which are just different prisons they have, all men's prisons, and has experienced just horrific sexual and physical violence after being moved from prison to prison to prison. And her experience and Ashley Diamond's experience are heartbreaking, but they're in no way unique. I mean, we hear from people across the country all the time who are experiencing similar experiences. And as Chinyere said, this is actually a violation of the law. I mean, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which was passed in 2003 and which had DOJ issued guidelines interpreting this law in 2012, makes it very clear that prisons are supposed to conduct an individualized case-by-case analysis, and that in doing that, they're supposed to give really significant weight to the person's own opinion about where they should be safely and appropriately housed. So when someone like Ashley Diamond shows up and says, I'm a woman, I need to be placed with women, that's supposed to be given really significant weight under PREA, as we call it, and we know that that's just, as a matter of course, not happening. I mean, there are a few agencies, usually local jurisdictions, that have written policies that are supposed to make that happen. DC, Denver, I think like Cook County in Illinois. But even in those jurisdictions, we know that they're not being implemented well on the ground. The PREA Resource Center, actually, we just learned, issued, and the PREA Resource Center is kind of like an educational body established by the DOJ PREA Management Office to help agencies comply with PREA and also to just kind of be a resource for the general public about PREA. They issued a guidance very recently, probably within the last couple weeks, interpreting this case-by-case standard, and it's far from perfect, but we're hoping to be able to use that in our continued advocacy to get more agencies in line with this requirement.
But in the meantime, with transgender women being housed in men's prisons at, almost ubiquitously, you have really, really intense and pervasive problems of sexual violence. And so we're just gonna take a moment now to watch a video of Ashley explaining this in her own words. As background, she filmed this video while in prison because she's a badass. And I'll let her speak for herself.
If I push play, I am pushing the replay. Press it up here.
I feel like the world is so obsessed with orange is the new black. I'm living it. Hi, my name is Ashley Diamond. I'm an American citizen, I'm a Christian, and I'm transgender. When I came into the system, this is what I looked like. This is now what I look like. Not only has my body made radical changes, but the effects of non-harming hormones have caused the dysphoria of my condition to deteriorate. My body shape has changed. The way my skin looks, feels. Morally and ethically, everything that is happening is wrong. Sexual violence has become a way of life in the Georgia Department of Corrections. The Georgia Department of Corrections says there's a zero tolerance for sexual violence. I seriously doubt that. I cannot stress to you what a treacherous journey this has been. It is amazing how a minor brush with the law has turned into a death sentence. This is more than just about hormone care. This is about gross human rights violations. 3 years of torture is enough.
In her 3.5 years in custody in Georgia, Ashley Diamond was raped and sexually assaulted 8 times. Every time she reported it to corrections officials, they blamed her. They said, well, what did you expect? You know, you're a freak, you're a sissy, you're a punk. You know, they said, you're asking for it. They said, aren't these people just your boyfriends? You know, she was utterly shut out of having any relief, any revised housing, any measures to keep her safe from the next attack. And this is something that unfortunately most, you know, the people in lockup who report sexual assault while being gender nonconforming or trans are experiencing and reporting. And that's something Demoya can speak to more in her representation of Passion Star.
Yes, so I represent Passion Star, an amazing Black transgender woman who is currently incarcerated in Texas Department of Criminal Justice facilities. Passion was convicted in 2002, December of 2002, and sentenced to a 20-year prison sentence. Since then, she's been housed in a series of men's prisons, and ever since, pretty much from day one, she's been sexually propositioned, she's been threatened, she's been sexually assaulted several times. She's filed reams upon reams of complaints. I mean, she's an amazing person. She's filed numerous complaints, asked for help, had similar experiences as Ashley, been told, you're a sissy. She's been called a faggot. She's been told to suck dick or fight or stop acting gay if she doesn't want to be assaulted. She's been told, quit coming to us with these complaints. And then when she didn't relent, she was put in isolation for extended periods of time in a 10 by 8 foot cell for 23 hours a day, with no interaction with anyone else, no access to any of the rehabilitative or educational or other opportunities you're supposed to have in prison. And again, these experiences are horrifying, but they're happening every day to transgender and non-conforming people in prison. And it's against the law. I mean, the statistic that was up there shows that it's a very pervasive problem, and 59% of women in a study, transgender women housed with men, reported sexual assaults. That's compared to only 4% of men who are not transgender or cisgender who are housed with men. So 59% versus 4%. And it's against the law. I mean, PREA was enacted in 2003, so many years ago, and the guidelines came out in 2012. And PREA is supposed to mandate zero tolerance, as Ashley Diamond said, for sexual assault, and that is far from the reality for transgender people. You know, as happened to Passion, oftentimes what happens is as soon as a transgender woman comes into prison, she's put in solitary confinement.